Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's pick up with, Nancy tracking down the Frozen Hearts killer. Well, the supernatural monster, because she ends up tracking down where Trot would have run into it in the cage and everything. And she comes back because she's trying to get the team to come help her. Ace is dealing with his own thing. We'll get to later. So is George and Bess. We'll get to that later. But the only person available is Ryan. And Ryan's all about, he's like, oh, sure, I can help you. Because I even love Nancy. Like, if you're going to listen in, come over here and get closer because you're messing me up. Like, you just like creeping, like eavesdropping from far away. I even love that he had to cover the kid's ears as like, Bess went a little too not too graphic, but too graphic for the young kid's ears about like what she was doing. I love her. I'm being like, I'm sorry I sat here because she was expecting Addie to be there. And it's like, oh, Addie's not here. It's like, oh, all we did was like, I'm just worried if she's sick, I might be sick or whatever, or maybe I made her sick. We exchange her saliva and stuff like that. Ryan's like, come on, not in front of the kids, but she just kind of got wrapped up. And Ryan's like, almost like, I didn't ask you any of that. You just went off on your own. So it's like I said, we'll get to that when we get the best sides of things. But Ryan's all about helping Nancy, and she's like, you want to help me track down like a supernatural serial killer and stuff like that? Which he's like, yeah, that sounds super cool, and he's all about it. And it's like, oh yeah, I mean, it's a byproduct of being able to spend more time with Nancy, so he looks at it like that. But also, I think he does probably think it is interesting, and what she does is so fascinating. So when they're off doing their thing, like, he likes hearing about some of her old cases, because she's like, yeah, like, I helped, I wondered some of the cases they reference, at least that she references in the show, like this particular one where she was talking about basically a con artist was like peddling like a love potion that he was dosing or whatever, and like she stopped a college student from spending all her money. I'm like, once again, it's like, because I know a lot of the titles of the episodes are actually from books, I believe, but I'm wondering, like, some of the cases she mentions, are those, like, smaller cases or stuff like that, like little winks and nods to, like, some of the Nancy Drew books. I'd assume so, or maybe they're just stuff they come up with for the show, but either way, Ryan appreciates learning as much as he can about her, because it's like, right, I wasn't there, but like, realizing how much a badass Nancy was as a kid. I mean, well, you still are, but it's just like, yeah. So it's like, cool, like, I'm telling you more about me. It's like, tell me something, I don't know, like, tell me what Lucy was like. It's like, she was funny. It's like, most people didn't know that about her. She made me laugh all the time. And I thought it was kind of sweet, because Nancy was like, yeah, I really like knowing that. And then they're both kind of there for a little bit, and they're just, it's kind of awkward. It's like, yeah, let's get back to it. So, but I love that it's like, right, this is Nancy's process, and so, like, she's about to break into a place, but Ryan's like, whoa, like, do we have to break it in, or, like, maybe we can find another way? It almost seemed like Nancy was disappointed that she didn't get to break, because I guess it's like, right, it's part of her process, like, breaking into places. It's like, you think you would learn a little better, but it's like, right, you're not after, like, a regular criminal, so you don't have to worry about the chain of evidence and it getting compromised. We're after a supernatural creature, so you don't have to worry about it in these particular cases. But Ryan found another way in, or rather fell into another way in. Hurt his shoulder, which I love. That it's like, cool, so let's talk about Ace. Shifting all your like chores from the chore wheel onto Ace. And he's like, what? And she puts his shoulder back in place. He's like, oh, that actually feels much better. She's like, so about that chore wheel, he's like, I'm not answering that. I love that. It's like, yeah, that's still, I mean, it was meant to distract his mind, but still it's kind of nice. I love that little through line. It's probably still going to continue, because I guess Carson hasn't had that talk with him yet about that. But there they ultimately do find where the Frozen Heart killer creature was, but they find other stuff as well, like there's a key, so it's like, oh yeah, this thing didn't get out on its own, someone did, help. What I thought was interesting though is it is like half of a key, because it seems like there are two keys. So that's going to be, I think that's going to be important for, well, later on, when the fact is, it's not just one person involved. There are probably multiple people involved with trying to get this thing released. But they check in its cage, and it's like, right, this thing is still coming back here. And I'm like, I'm wondering, is it coming back for the doll that Nancy found? Because whatever it was, it's like, she was actually kind of drawn to it. She's like, oh, like, why did you grab it? It's like, yeah, I saw it from the vision, but she never really went into like, why she grabbed it. It's like, she felt something, some pull to it. Whatever it is, Nancy feels it, because you would think, like, I was like, if it was a Hudson thing, Ryan would have felt something from it, but maybe it's just like he wasn't in close proximity. Maybe it's because there's a more direct correlation between Nancy and Temperance. I mean, Temperance did use her blood specifically to, like, become youthful again. So maybe there's some correlation there. I'm assuming this has something to do with Temperance's like words of it to Nancy last episode about like, right, your destiny. Because I'm wondering, like, is it just Bess that can tap into the magic, or is, like, does as her descendant, like, maybe Nancy has the potential, you know, being like the seventh generation, like, well, the seventh daughter or something like that, you know, kind of like the comparison, like, oh, the seventh son. So maybe that in itself gives Nancy like a special something that no other generation has, and that's why Temperance has such a fascination with her specifically, because she has it's a once in a generation thing. Like, you'd have to wait 7 more generations for another Nancy to pop up, so that's why it's like, now's the time. So I think that's fascinating. But with the Frozen Heart killer creature does show up again, but it doesn't kill them. In fact, it only wants the doll, which then he goes like, okay, because then Nancy starts thinking like, right, this thing doesn't pick its victims at random, because if it did, it'd probably be killing a lot more than it did. But maybe the argument is, right, because it's only killed 2 people so far. The other people were Trot's victims. It killed Matthew and it killed Jake. So why them specifically? Because there's still no connection that we're aware of between the victims in that regard. So Matthew, it makes sense because he's looking into all of this. Maybe Jake was just done to throw, because maybe it was to get Trot released or something, like on the technicalities, by making it seem like, oh, there was someone else out there, and it would kind of like impede the case a little bit. So like, I'd assume that's why Jake might have been killed. Matthew, it makes sense because he was neck deep in all this Hudson related stuff, or looking into it and stuff. So maybe he stumbled across something someone didn't want him to find. Because we still haven't dealt with it, but I didn't think about it to this episode. I was like, right, there's I'm blanking on their name now, but there's that secret society that we found out about last season. That's still a huge storyline that still hasn't really been tackled yet, so I'm assuming that would bleed over. Maybe it has some correlation and connection to this Frozen Heart killer, because Ryan and Nancy found a way out of those tunnels by going up a ladder. And the moment they got there, I was like, isn't this like Hannah's place? And it's the History Society. And you're like, so why does she have a ladder that leads there? Why hasn't she said anything about it? And then I start being like, it is interesting, for one, we haven't seen Hannah so far, and every time like Nancy kept calling her earlier in the episode, I thought that was going to be something like, oh, she's like, I thought like maybe something had happened to Hannah. Still could be, but it's like, right, I was like, that is kind of suspicious that she didn't pick up. So it's like, yeah, she's the one that released the creature. But now they see, like, looking at the surveillance footage, she found the doorway and she went down there with a key. So it seems like she's the one, but it's like, why would she release a supernatural killer when she's done nothing but help them deal with the supernatural over the course of the series? What changed? I think she's being controlled by somebody. Because once again, there's 2 parts to the key. Her key was there, so I think Hannah got kidnapped. I think that's why they haven't heard anything from her. 2, who has the other half of the key is important, because they're the ones that are in control. And I think they might have, because at first I was like, because obviously it gets thrown out there like maybe Temperance has something to do. It's like, no, maybe not. I don't know. It's just interesting that this does like all trail back to the moment Temperance did come back to town. So, because at that same time, Hannah, at that moment, the lights flickered out, and then, like, Hannah immediately went to the door. It's like, it seemed like that was happening while Temperance, so, like, I don't think Temperance would have had time to act. So, somebody else might be at play. Something else might be at play here. I wonder if they're, like, are we going to find out there's actually secretly another woman in white still alive other than Temperance? I mean, it could just be, like, because, like, I mean, those stories connected, that secret society, once again, I'm blanking on their name, they had roots connected to the, like, they, didn't they kill all the women in white or something like that? Because, like, that correlates to, like, those phantoms and everything they dealt with last season. I'm blanking on a lot of details. But it's like, yeah, that, like, it's the group that, like I said, Nancy and them found out about, but they have, like, a long history, too, and they're still alive and well to this day. So I'd assume like they'd have access to some stuff that the women in white didn't, maybe. So there's something there. So I'm curious to see where things kind of go on that front. other elements to this episode, obviously Nick and George are still having their back and forth because George is upset because it's, but Bess is like, well, you did kind of tell a lie. She's like, it's like, well, it's more so like you didn't fully tell him the truth and stuff like that. But for her, it's like, I was dealing with it my own. I'm not good at, I think for George, it's like, which I can understand too. It's like, you're not the sharing type sometimes. You're just, people are just built that way with some people aren't very good at sharing and not, it doesn't come natural to them. And even she talks to Nick about it later on. It's like, you're not sharing. Like, the fact is, you haven't talked about the fact is why you haven't gone back to Florida at any point in time. And he was about to say something, but he's like, right, he recognizes like the hypocrisy of it. It's like, yeah, there's things I don't like talking about, so it's not like I'm the most forthcoming. But George talked about the fact is that she does apologize about, because obviously it turned into like a whole vacuum thing. And, oh yeah, like I love her metaphor being like, oh, well, maybe the vacuum is getting clogged up because you're so good at sweeping stuff under the rug. I'm like, oh, I love that. I love that. I was like, where are we going with this vacuum comparison? Because I knew you were going to use it as a metaphor for your situation. It's like, sweeping stuff under the rug. That's good. That's good. But yeah, like, George is like, she wanted Nick to try it, to see things from her perspective and, try not to talk. But she's like, no, I'll try things from your perspective and be a little more honest and open. And for him, what he wanted to say was like, the thing I should have said last night or this morning or any time at all afterwards was like, I am so proud of you doing what you did, going to see your dad. That was got to be one of the hardest things ever, So I should, I wish, that took a lot of courage. And he's like, I wish I could have, I wish I could have some of that for myself. Maybe in relation to some of the stuff of why he doesn't go back to Florida. I'm assuming like, family related stuff of like, because his mom did try to get him to come back after everything, but he decided, I mean, his entire life's here, but there's, Florida still holds a lot of wounds for him about like, his situation, I think. So maybe that's why he's still, but maybe there's still more to the story he hasn't really talked about, but it's like, right, you get there in your own time. But, because George and Bess were looking into it this episode, a means of saving them, George splitting her and Odette, which I doubt, like, it doesn't seem like Bess is thinking like, oh, once Odette's free, it's like, no, she's just going to be a spirit and you still wouldn't be able to be together. You could see each other, but it's like most likely like if they ever got split, Odette would immediately like move on. There probably wouldn't be like, oh, I'm possessing a new body. It's like, no. So that's why she's not getting too caught up in the thought of like, it's more so like, no, let's save George and get her full life back instead of it being cut short to the 10 years because of Odette. But they ended up talking to Father Jonathan because they found a book. He was writing a note, like he had talked about saving someone with a similar process. And so it turns out, well, because he's in, like, he has a thing for Hannah, so he only came because of Hannah. But it's like, cool, just like tell us what this whole thing is about. It turns out these soul splitters were destroyed. I forgot like who he said they were destroyed by. They were seen as bad because I think the church kind of ended up destroying most of them or something like that. I forgot who he said ended up destroying them. And now there's only like replicas that probably aren't the originals. Like, these makeshift, soul splitters. But he's like, yeah, they're not called soul unseparators. Now what it sounds like he's saying to me is it don't seem like it's going to be a good even cut. We might have spoilers. The magicians, I'll reference Julia's circumstances when it came to her soul. We'll leave it at that. Maybe there'll be kind of a slice and dice that is probably not the even split. Because like Jonathan was kind of like, I'm wearing you away from this because it's like, warning you away from this because it's not a good option. Because I think there's probably too much risk. Because it's like, right, the soul split, yeah, you might separate your soul from that other person, but you might be slicing and dicing your soul in the process. And any fraction of your soul being gone is probably not a good, I mean, it might not even do a clean cut of like, oh, because it's probably like your souls are so entangled that it's probably not an easy fix of like, okay, this is Odette's soul and this is my soul. It might be too entangled for a clean, even split. So that might be an issue in its own right. But George and Bess aren't listening. They're still trying to track it down regardless. It seems like the only ones that are in existence would be on the black market because it was along with like other artifacts and stuff like that, like books and stuff about it were stolen. So that ties into Ace's story a little bit, because some of the stuff that was retrieved from Mr. Bobbsey, it's like maybe that's some of that has that same, like, there could be stuff from the that could help George amongst them. So because Ace's whole situation is he's giving his testimony, but Carson doesn't let him sign because it turns out Ace's immunity deal isn't there, because Gene feels like he might be still holding back, so they don't want to give him the immunity deal. So for him, it's, obviously he's still in that awkward position with his family. Turns out someone threw a rock in his window, calling him a rat. It's like, which I love that. I'm like, he's a rat for what? Ratting on the guy that he had no, like, you tricked me. I was doing small favors for you. I didn't know I was doing criminal stuff. Like, I don't think that to me, that doesn't fit as being like, oh, you're a rat. It's like, shut up. You dragged him into this because he wanted to help you, and you guised it as like, oh, like, this is something else. It's like, but I guess in his mind, it's like, oh, you already know who I was. You know what I was about. So, like, you were just being naive and blah, 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 blah. I mean, his reasons for helping out Bertram, I think, aren't as altruistic. It's like, oh, like, he's just like, oh, I just want to stay connected to Amanda. It's like, I think it's because your heart was flittering other places, and it kind of ground your heart a little bit more. Like, no, I'm with Amanda. It needs to be towards Amanda because it's floating towards Nancy. That I think he just, he kind of used that as an excuse. Because at the time, he had already started feeling like he was floating away from Amanda and more towards, because the moment they went on their little getaway at the end of season 2, it made him go like, I feel like I'm missing something. And that's also why he did, because she's like, right, you should have gone to Spain with me. He's like, I should have. It's like, the reason why he didn't is because it wasn't just his friends. It was Nancy in particular made him not want to leave, because I think he didn't, he didn't want to take, because he felt the pull of like, yeah, there was something I was missing. And in Horseshoe Bay, he kind of, I guess he feels a little closer to that something, and that something being Nancy, whether he realizes it or not. I think he does. He just didn't ever want to admit it, because it's like, yeah, you're in a relationship and you don't want to ever admit that, like, yeah, there's something bubbling between you and one of your friends. And it's like, yeah. Because the thing is, but going back to it, like, him and his dad are still in an awkward position, but, his mom is like, yeah, just make sure you're safe. That's all I care about. So he runs into Amanda, because Carson's like, the only way you're going to be away from all of this if you can find Bertram Bobbsey yourself. Like, that's the only way that you're going to not get dragged down in this. Amanda happens to come back in town just in time, because I think Carson had called her about stuff, but like didn't fill her in. And so, and I love that the whole making out thing, and it's like, oh cool. And like, Carson's like, yeah, I'm gonna get going, which I love that, like, while they're looking through all the footage and stuff like that, they come across, like, on the cameras and stuff like that, they saw Addie and Bess making out. She's like, hey, and they're like, okay, find us something that isn't related to that. And she's like, yeah, I'll get on top of that, which Bess, because Bess was reluctant to try, like, because I thought it was interesting, like, circling into that really quickly, I thought it was fascinating where, like, George was like, wait, you've never been rejected before, have you? And she's like, what? No. And it's like, so that's what it is. Like, she doesn't know how to handle Addie, because it's like, right, she got rejected. It's like, right, you've never, like, had, like, anytime you've ever been with someone, there's ever been a connection, it's always, like, worked out. I mean, even if the relationship didn't, it's like you've never been outwardly rejected by somebody. So, I have to look into it, too, because the actress who plays Addie seems familiar, and I just can't place what I know her from. But aside from that, like, I thought that was actually kind of endearing and kind of sweet. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm used to rejection, so it's like, yeah. But it's like, yeah, rejection makes you a little reluctant to ever put yourself out there again. I get it, but still, it's like, right, take advice from someone who has a limited lifespan. Like, kind of don't wait. Like, if you want to ask Addie out, like, take the chance. Like, yes, you might get rejected, but still, like, because at the end of the day, it is like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? You could get rejected again, but, But circling back to the Ace thing, he talks to her about, like, what he got mixed up in with her dad, which she's like, if I knew where my dad was, I don't know where my dad is, but if I did know where he was, I still wouldn't tell you. She's like, yeah, you should have come to Spain with me. You wouldn't have gotten in all this trouble. But it is a thing of also, like, because for her, it's like, right, my dad's a criminal and what, he deserves to be in jail. But she's like, my dad might be a criminal, but I remember he's the same dad that spoon-fed me soup when I was sick. Like, he had his bad sides, but he's also still my dad, and I would never betray him. Amanda did find him later on, though, but she was trying to convince her dad to turn himself in. She never once made it, I thought it was kind of interesting, too, and I think this speaks volume. Like, at no point did she go like, yeah, you'd be helping out Ace. It's like, what? No, that punk kid who's ratting on me. She knew not to bring that up because she knew that'd make him less inclined. So she made it more so like, and I think that was her main motivation. Like, if you turn yourself in, like, they'll go a little easier on you if you turn yourself in. Plus, we could be a family again. He's like, no, we are a family again right now. So he's trying to like bail, and he wants her to come with him. I'm curious what Gil's perspective on this whole situation would be. But Ace shows up, and the cops are there. It's like, wait, you followed me. Which, I don't know whether Amanda... Because she says later on, I'm like, no, I knew that you would follow me. So it's like, yeah, she was kind of hoping so. Because now, you are the one that's got all my dad's wrath. I don't. Like, he might be pissed at me thinking, like, I'm incompetent for, like, trusting you. But it's like, no, now he's pissed at you and not me. So my dad's also safe because he's in jail, and now... he won't suffer any larger repercussions for like running and stuff like that, being on the lam for even longer. So obviously Ace betrayed her trust, but she was also like, right, this is where my dad keeps any like valuable stuff. Like, you know, I'm doing this for George. So like the Bobsies, or even he's like, but no one's keeping score. It's like, well, aren't they, Ace? Like, you couldn't even trust me to do the right thing. You took that choice away from me. And he wants to talk, but she's like, no, goodbye, Ace. And it's like, it is sad, but also part of me is like, it sucks. Like, if it wasn't for the Nancy thing, I'd be more heartbroken. But I'm just like, because I want Nancy and him together, because it's like, they're clicking and they're vibing. You knew it was going to, like, it's like, because that's the sad thing, when you want the certain hook, the certain relationships you want together, you're like, it kind of sucks you guys broke up. It's like, spoilers, Archie and, I don't know, I was always split on that. I mean, I might be a hypocrite, because I might have been like, but like, because I like Archie and Veronica. I mean, they were together most of the series, but there was always that fling back and forth with Betty. Like, there's always been that thing since they were kids, and also since like the beginning of the series is where that kind of started. But it's kind of like that, where like Betty and Archie are kind of trying their swing at things. So it's kind of that thing of like, it kind of sucks that him and Veronica broke up, but you're like, what? Him and Betty, you know? So it's almost like that. So, which makes me always like, once again, the hopeless romantic that I am, always feel bad, because like, man, it always sucks in situations. It's just that someone's always going to walk away with their heart broken type of situation, you know? So it sucks that things have kind of come down to that, but a lot of really interesting things. I'm curious, like I said, is A's going to try and fix things between him and Amanda, and I wonder if this is going to make Amanda go dark side a little bit. I mean, Gil's already got his dark side. Amanda wasn't as, but she's been shown to like, right, she kind of chooses her family over anyone else. I mean, that's, you know, that's what that comes down to as well. Ace also is in a better position with his dad. I mean, his dad made it like, like, come over, like, your mom would be disappointed if you didn't. And it's like, so his dad made it more about the mom, but I think, you know, he was like, oh no, I'm good. Like, I'll find another job and I'll be good. Like, he's like, because he's like, you can't, your mom says you can move back in, but it's like, so him and his dad, I think, are still in that awkward position. Like, they're using their mom as the buffer zone of like, right, we can work through this, but I think it's still going to be a bumpy road. I mean, how does she feel about the grant thing? We haven't really touched on that, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see where everything takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.